Welcome back. Professor Victor Davis Hanson asks, what ultimately ended the nihilistic Soviet system? Was it not that Russians finally tired of the Kremlin's lies and hypocrisies that permeated every facet of their falsified lives, he asks. Here are 10 symptoms of Sovietism. Ask yourself whether we are headed down the same road to perdition. Professor Hanson asks of you. 1. There was no escape from ideological indoctrination. Anywhere, a job in the bureaucracy or the military assignment hinged not so much on merit, expertise, or past achievement. What mattered was loud enthusiasm for the Soviet system. Wokeness is becoming our new Soviet-like state religion. Careerists assert that America was always and still is a systematically racist country without ever producing proof or a sustained argument. 2, the Soviets fused their press with the government. Pravda, or truth, was the official megaphone of state-sanctioned lies. Journalists simply regurgitated the talking points of their party partners. In 2017, some university and independent media monitoring centers found that 93% of American network media coverage of the early Trump administration was negative. The most inflammatory of the media's political assertions, Trump-Russia collusion, Hunter Biden's laptop was a product of Russian disinformation, and Capitol officer Brian Sicknick was murdered by a Trump rioter inside the Capitol. This was all false. All false. 3. The Soviet surveillance state enlisted apparatchiks and lackeys to ferret out ideological dissidents. Recently, we learned that the Department of Defense is reviewing its rosters to spot insurrectionary sentiments. The Postal Service recently admitted it uses tracking programs to monitor the social media postings of Americans. Left-wing CNN recently alleged that the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security is considering partnering with private surveillance firms to get around government prohibitions on scrutinizing Americans' expression. From 2015 to 2017, the FBI, CIA, and Justice Department engaged in efforts to monitor and injure the Trump campaign and then sabotage a presidential transition. 4. The Soviet educational system sought not to enlighten, but to indoctrinate young minds in proper government-approved thought. Currently, cash-strapped universities nationwide are hiring thousands of diversity, equity, and inclusion staffers and administrators. Their chief task is to scan admissions, hiring, curriculum, and administration of universities. Like good commissars, our diversity czars police compliance with the official narrative that a flawed America must confess, apologize, and renounce its evil foundations. 5. The official Soviet was run by a pampered elite, exempt from the ramifications of its own radical socialist ideologies. So too, woke Silicon Valley billionaires talk socialistically, but live like royalty. Coke and Delta Airlines CEOs who hector Americans on their illiberality, respectively, make over $16 million a year. What unites current woke activists like Oprah Winfrey, LeBron James, Mark Zuckerberg, and the Obamas are their huge estates and their multi-million-dollar wealth. Just as the select few of the old Soviet nomenclatura had their Black Sea dachas, so our loudest top-down revolutionaries prefer living in Martha's Vineyard, Beverly Hills, Montecito, and Malibu. 6. The Soviets mastered Trotskyization, or the rewriting and airbrushing away of history, to fabricate present reality. Are Americans any different when they indulge in a frenzy of name-calling, nighttime statue-toppling, monument-defacing, book-banning, and cancellation? 7. The Soviets created a climate of fear and rewarded stool pigeons to root and rat out all potential enemies of the people. Since when did Americans encourage coworkers to turn in others for an ill-considered word in a private conversation? Why do thousands now scour the internet to find any past incorrect expression of a competitor, rival, or opponent? Why are there now new thought criminals supposedly guilty of climate racism, immigration racism, vaccination racism, and almost anything racism? 8. Soviet law, state prosecutors, and courts were weaponized according to ideology. In America, where and for what reason you riot determines whether you face legal consequences. Politically correct sanctuary cities with impunity defy the law. Jury members are terrified of being doxxed and hunted down for an incorrect vote. The CIA and FBI are becoming as ideological as the old KGB. 9. The Soviets doled out prizes on the basis of correct Soviet thought. In America, now most concede that Emmy, Grammy, Tony, and Oscar awards or Pulitzer Prizes do not reflect the year's best television show, song, play, movie, or book, rather than the most politically correct production from the most woke arena. 10. The Soviets offered no apologies for extinguishing freedom. Instead, they boasted they were advocates of equity, champions of the underclass, enemies of privilege, and therefore could terminate anyone or anything they pleased. Our wokeists are similarly defending their thought control efforts. Forced re-education sessions, scripted confessionals, mandatory apologies, Trotskyization of our past, and cancel culture on the pretense that we need long overdue fundamental transformation. So if they destroy people in the name of equity, then their nihilism is justified. Trotskyization, as Professor Hanson describes it. It's my biggest and most long-term concern for America. But what struck me in his list, and I found myself rereading this sentence a few times, not figuring out why, something about it was giving me pause. It was this sentence, quote, "What unites current woke activists like Oprah Winfrey, LeBron James, Mark Zuckerberg, and the Obamas are their huge estates and their multi-million-dollar wealth, just as the select few of the old Soviet nomenclatura had their Black Sea dachas, so our loudest top-down revolutionaries prefer living in Martha's Vineyard, Beverly Hills, etc." I read that and reread it until I realized in this systematically racist country, one that was problematically, we were lectured, anti-Semitic in 2017 and 2018, and never treated a black man as a full human being, as Kamala Harris says, this systematically racist country can find in that list of 4 captains of the universe Oprah Winfrey, LeBron James, Mark Zuckerberg, and the Obamas. Among that group of 3 African Americans and 1 Jewish American, we have the wealth of about $120 billion. Billions of worth for Winfrey and Zuckerberg, millions for the Obamas, and tens of millions for LeBron James. 2 out of those 4, Winfrey and James, when not doing their regular job, royalty interviews, and basketball playing, make news for their denunciations of America and how racist and hard to get ahead here it is. Some even want to physically target the police. One of the 4 has no problem in engaging in partisan and ideological censorship that finds the former president of the United States beyond the pale, but not pages dedicated to Ayatollahs Khomeini or Khamenei or run by Louis Farrakhan. Argufiers on behalf of anti-gay, anti-Semitic, and genocidal literal bigotry. One of them was the most powerful man in the world, having been raised in America and having gotten Americans to vote for him twice to be the most powerful man in the world. So things have become so divorced from reality between the woke lectures and the facts on the ground that we might as well have Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos complaining that white men can't succeed in America. It's that absurd. It's that divorced from reality. We'd laugh at someone who agreed with that. We'd cancel, however, or censor, or at a minimum condemn those who point out the same to Winfrey and James and the Obamas and the Zuckerbergs. And one could add a great many others. Why not add Colin Kaepernick while we're at it? I believe his last salary I read about from Nike was over $20 million a year. There's an old saying in the military: if the map and the ground don't agree, the map is wrong. Well, the map here is wrong because it doesn't agree with what's happening on the ground here. Woke racism. Asian American writer Helen Rowley writes the following: the only difference between the skinheads and the woke left is that the woke left hides its racism under cover of nice-sounding words such as fact-finding and equity and disparate impact and anti-racism and social justice. The woke left's racism is not a phenomenon that exists on social media exclusively, though. It has permeated throughout our society, from the government to healthcare to corporations and schools. It is becoming a systemic problem in America. Woke racism has influenced how governments at both the federal and the state and local levels have structured COVID-19 aid programs for Americans. For instance, as soon as Joe Biden became the president, he announced that his administration would restructure the COVID-related small business loan program by prioritizing businesses owned by minority and female Americans. A month later, Democrats in Congress wrote a special clause in the American Rescue Plan, a federal COVID-19 relief package, instructing the Secretary of Agriculture to provide debt relief to farmers based not on their need, but their race. At the local level, think about Democratic Oakland, California Mayor Libby Schaaf, who announced last month that the city would hand out a monthly guaranteed payments to its black and indigenous families and other people of color, but poor whites who live below the poverty line are not eligible. Mayor Schaaf is a member of the National Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, and she hopes to eventually export her city's race-based basic income program throughout the nation. Incidentally, Oakland is a basket case. Woke racism has also influenced healthcare decisions. Some woke health experts argued that social justice concern alongside science should drive CDC decisions about how to prioritize vaccine distribution. The CDC created a social vulnerability index to help guide distribution. The index de-emphasized the elderly, even though they are the most vulnerable segment, and it suffered the highest fatality rate over the pandemic. According to the New York Times, woke experts only spoke about how letting the older populations who are also whiter die helps, quote, level the playing field, close quote. Remember that old phrase? Well, it's back. An infectious disease expert at Harvard even argued that teachers weren't essential workers because too often, quote, they're white, close quote. For anyone ever wondering how a death panel of government-run healthcare might operate in practice, these woke experts' normalization of racism should send chills down the spine. Given the growing wokeness of America's big corporations, no one should be surprised to learn that American workers are indoctrinated with woke racism disguised as mandatory diversity training. For example, employees at Coca-Cola are required to take a diversity training course that says they be, quote, less white, close quote, and thus less oppressive, quote, close quote. The company ultimately pulled the training after a whistleblower exposed it to the public, but there's no doubt many American workers are still engaged in similar training throughout corporate America. The Cambridge Dictionary defines racism as policies and practices that, quote, result in and support an unfair advantage to some people and an unfair or harmful treatment of others based on race, close quote. By this definition, what the woke left practices is racism. It seems that everything the woke left does, regardless of its rhetoric, will result in unfair advantage for some and harm for others based exclusively on skin pigment. Since the woke left controls our government, corporate America, mainstream media, healthcare, and education, woke racism has become the systematic problem that keeps America so divided. For America to achieve genuine healing and equality of opportunity for all, we must confront it the same way we confronted old school racism. It is, after all, the same thing. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.